elder J.R. Fleming with us today. And special thanks to Amanda. You can find her on Instagram. She moved my hair up. And so to get him a little bit introduced, he can introduce himself. But J.R., mainly from my research, excuse me if I'm wrong, I've researched that he works more in homeland security and housing with the AEC, anti-eviction campaign. He can explain that more, and yeah, so.
Okay, so I'm J.R. Fleming. As you said, I do a lot of work with housing. I do a lot of work with human rights in the country, you know what I'm saying? So I'm part of the original Homeland Security, you know what I'm saying? Because it's about the land being utilized for the people. The 2013 recipient of the Human Rights Award by the U.S. Human Rights Network. I've done a lot of work for the last 15 years around housing because I think it's something necessary in order for people to be stable in life and have some type of security. You know, certain things should be guaranteed when it comes to human rights, and them things are food, clothing, and shelter. So I see myself as one, for the sake of Homeland Security, enforcing the human rights of the people. And let me say this, I am honored to be on the show, man, first episode, so thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're the first person I go to because you know children. So, yeah, that's JR, and we're going to get into the questions now. So, why does housing stand out to you?
Without housing, people become vulnerable, you know, particularly women and children, to the horrible side of society. If you force somebody into the street without that simple shelter and cover, it's a reason why they call it shelter, so you can be away from harm. You expose people to all types of harm in life if they don't have shelter. So housing being the only shelter available in our country, I felt that it was necessary for folks to continue to focus on the fight for housing. Because without housing, people will be exposed to all type of human rights violations. You know, they can die from the cold. You know, like this year alone, we had 15 people die from the cold. And it's unexplainable when you have vacant buildings.
Yeah. Because you notice more and more that more poor people are, like, earlier on this week or last week, I drew this pyramid of the financial hierarchy, and most people, what I've seen is that people, like younger people, think that violence will get money because that's all the resources that they have, and then that makes the prison rates go up and the houses go more vacant, and then the people, and mostly women and children are left behind because the fathers are put in jail for crimes.
That's right.
Or they can't maintain the family because they've already had too many situations going on. But you notice that, and then the poor have no resources to money, so how are they supposed to get into shelter?
And that's why we say housing should be a human right. Because like you said, when you remove the father from the household and you force him to prison, it puts a mentality in the man to what his worth is. Sometimes man, especially black men in this country, have been marginalized so hard and so bad, oppressed, have been discriminated against, they can't find simple resources to make them feel like a man, and that's to provide shelter for their family, their women and children. And so the only housing that they do find, and we've sadly joked about it to show people how serious it was, that the only public housing for a man of color or a black man is jail. You know, we joke and say, at least you get 3 meals a day in a bed, you know, versus they won't get that to you in the world. They won't have a man get housing if he's unemployed, without a job. In fact, almost 90% of public housing is made up of women and children. The men are marginalized and excluded. And so then you say, okay, if I can't live in public housing, I can't get housing on my own, where do I get housed? And oftentimes you find out that this is why they got the prison, because it acts as an ad hoc public housing for poor folks, especially poor black men.
Yeah, and that's hard because it's disrespectful to see that women and children aren't nurtured for shelter at the least.
That's right, at the least.
And people, and that just shows that humanity doesn't realize that the woman 17, the child is the seed, and without anything to nurture that, it's just horrible. And people just don't realize that nowadays. So, and then nowadays I realize that the father, not to insult the fathers out there who are with their children or who aren't, but are more like a bonus parent, because women have adapted to being alone as a single parent situation, working 3 jobs.
And that's because, yeah, and that's true. And oftentimes you find that that's because the way society has set up, how can we say it, the conditions and restrictions to how a woman with a child can get assistance from the government. When it comes to public housing or subsidized housing or Section 8 housing, the government has set up these institutions, whereas in order to get this help from us, the father cannot be in the household. And so they become that bumless, homeless parent on the street. Then the mother is forced to take on the responsibility of not just the mother nurturing the child, like you said, but the breadwinner. She's taking the job on the father. Now she has to bring the money to the table, take care of the child, and keep the child in the house. So she finds herself laboring, 3 times as hard as a man would have to labor just to have a household in which her child has shelter. And it's hard out here. We say some of these policies intentionally split up the black family because it made the father feel worthless, which then caused animosity between the woman and the man, and who suffers at the end of the day? The child, right? Because he's without his father, the mother and father into it. The father has some resentment because the woman is getting all the resources. So the black male do feel resentment at times that the woman is getting all of the resources. He can't get no medical card. He can't get no public housing. He can't get no college assistance. But what he can get on a regular basis in America is incarceration. And as we talk about why black men are going to prison, we look at it now, child support is sending a man to prison. Is it his fault that America discriminates? He cannot get a job for the man who want to work, right? He cannot stable himself so he can play an active role in his child's life. So what a black male sees, or most men see in this country now, is that America has set up a system that says, I will spend $70,000 a year, upwards of 70 grand a year, to have you locked up and work for almost $1 a day. I can afford to have you locked up for $70,000 a year. But if you look at it in the real world, it's cheaper to house a person. $1,000 a month is $12,000 a year. Another $1,000, and that's for housing. So they give you $1,000 a month for housing. $1,000 in health care coverage. That's $24,000 a year. $1,000 in food a month for food is $12,000 a year. A total of covering their food, their health, and their shelter, that's $36,000. You spent $1,000 a month on each man for that. And then if you want to put education on it, another $1,000 a month. And you say you cover education, housing, health care, and food for these individuals. That's $48,000 you will spend a year giving people access to this, versus spending $70,000 a year to lock them up. So it says something to like what you open up with saying, something is wrong with humanity, because it don't make mathematical sense to lock folks up when it's cheaper to help them in the real world, and where you strengthen families. So yeah, this is why we fight for human rights.
Yeah, and that's hard because the whole economic system doesn't make sense either, because you have to spend money and then it's labor, and then you're mentally a slave to the system of musical chairs where someone always is going to get left out and there's only going to be one winner in the end.
That's right. And that's how our society is functioning today. It makes no sense when you have a society laboring, but they can't consume anything. It's just like they're working for debt. And you say, why does the economy suffer? Well, if you got millions of unemployed people, that means you got millions of people who's not buying a product. And if capitalism is based off the sale of product or the exchange of product, then you need a consumer. This has happened because of automation. There's always somebody up there who want to make more and more money at the top, right? And there's always going to be some folks left out. Before the economy crashed, it was poor folks that was always left out. What we're seeing in this day and time with student debt, unemployment, and a lot of jobs being lost in certain sector, professional sector, is now the middle class is suffering, right? So now this machine, this rich machine is just eating up the poor folks, and now it's eating up the middle class folks. So it's only when the poor folks and the middle class folks come together and realize their strength in numbers to attack this machine to say, you cannot exist without me. Your wealth means nothing without my labor. So it has to be some form of human boycott sooner than later if your generation is not going to suffer the same.
And then in the end, it doesn't work out. Because pretty soon the high classes just want to go eat up everyone.
That's right.
All the high classes who are in the same class as them. And there was, like how I put it into one sentence, there's vulnerability due to classism and economics.
That's right.
So when you look at that in a certain way, it just makes no sense that we have this hierarchy of economics putting us at the bottom and top and everything. And so I know that first question ran on a while long, so we're going to get to the next question. When did you get into the commitment of housing?
Wow. It had to be, I would say, in 1999, the United States signed away this program called Hope 6. And in this program, it was designed that they were going to demolish all of the public housing. So for years, I played around with, I volunteered when I could. But it wasn't actually until about 2001, I want to say 2001, 2002 when I took it serious and started working with an organization called the Coalition to Protect Public Housing. I've seen too many units of public housing now, so I was at about 12, 13 years ago. I really took it on, really day-to-day organizing for housing, 12, 13 years ago.
Well, it's hard to take it seriously because you got to maintain yourself.
You got to maintain yourself, your father, a lot of children, 10 children.
Yeah.
So it was a lot to give up my time when I had all these children and responsibility, because I felt that if we ever became a people who left women, who are the queens, the nurturers, the mothers, the life givers, right, outside of the creator, of generations to come, the women being, they are the one who carry the baby for 9 months. If they are the one who's going to ensure that the human race is going to exist in the future, then they are the ones who need the simplest protection. Well, how can a woman have a child if she's homeless in the street, especially in some of these weather conditions?
At the least.
At the least. So if we're not protecting our women and children at the least, then what are we doing?
And it's just complicated because people want housing and they want to fight against it, but they don't know what their boundaries are. So some people go all out on it and then they end up going to prison, and then some people ignore it because they don't know how far they can go with it. And then they end up just not making a change at all. So most people like to ignore it, and then people like to go extreme against it, and then it's just it's like one or the other mostly. And those people who do know their rights are small and separated.
And that's what it is. We ask people, to ask you the question, if in the last 7 years, since 2007, that 10 million Americans lost their home and was evicted, why is it there isn't at least 2 million Americans fighting for housing? It says something about the people. At the end of the day, like you said, some of them just don't know, and they don't know what limit they need to push, how far they need to go, and what they're willing to fight for, versus what they already lost. I always say, we take over housing at the anti-eviction campaign. That's one of the things we do. We go into the community, get the community support, try to get the young people off the street to come in the house, help us fix it up, learn some skill sets, fix up the house, and move homeless women and children in. Because we feel we owe it to society to push the limit, right? Like the civil rights movement did, where we say we got a human rights movement, so we got to push the envelope. Be willing to go to jail to say, look, what I'm doing is morally right. I cannot leave a woman and a child homeless when there's all these vacant buildings. I'm obligated not to leave them vulnerable as a human being for the sake of humanity. And so that's our argument, is that we're trying to have women and children, because this is not something we're doing politically. because it's morally right, one, and two, they're the most vulnerable population.
And then you notice at the end of the day, like, people who are preventing us from all these rights and put us in incarceration positions think that we're savages. When you're the one who's been preventing us from supporting other people, and they don't even look at why we do this, and you prevent us from having any resources to any food, shelter, anything, because and then you allow us to get tempted. It's like having someone eat right in front of you scones and sugar when you get mud to eat, and then they eat it right in front of you.
And they expect you not to snatch it out their hand and they plate. Exactly. So yeah, the government is often known for that, setting up the conditions that will make it look like to the world that people are savages, right? And but what you see is a race of people or a group of people or a class of people who say it makes no sense that 1% controls all of this. It makes no sense to me that you have all of this abundant resources and I'm starving or my children are starving. So desperate people often do desperate things. And we say, what are they desperate for? And what we come to find out through research and engaging people, they're desperate for resources. Resources that we got an abundance of it. But because of our discriminatory practices, and because we're trying to force people to our prison system, be it school to prison, pushed out to prison, poverty to prison. They got a straight to prison program for everybody. Unemployment to prison. Desperate people do desperate things, And sometimes that desperate act is not just reflective in the black community, but the white community. And that's what, since this recent economic crash, we've seen a lot of desperate acts by white folks in America because they realize that greed do not discriminate. Greed do not discriminate. And it just as it affected the black, Latino, and other racial groups in America, now it has come home and it's affecting white America. And that's why we learned that there was a crisis in the world, because first, for the first time, white folks were being impacted by hardship. And when black folks were like, other racial groups, we was pro for a long time. We got by with the Kool-Aid and the cheese sandwich and the tuna sandwich. We got by with the little thing. We were okay with public housing. And that's why today you see more and more people arguing for public housing. White folks who lost their home. Rich folks who lost their home. Middle class, working folks who lost their job and home. Now they saying, I wish we would have fought for public housing because now I need it.
And now you see that it's more exploited on the south and west side of Chicago, and it's probably globally, but you do realize when you see it in the city that we live in, of Chicago, it's more put out there on, exploited on the south and west side, and people just think that they're bad, but the upper class, you sometimes realize, only provide a little lens of information, and through that lens, you just see violence, killing, and prisons.
And that's how they market it. How you stop a person from getting resources, you demonize it. And with that lens, you talk about the media only paints a picture of black community of that as in other violence and chaos, and it's at war with each other. They never paint the picture, mainstream media, is the impact that closing a bunch of schools will have in causing civil unrest and territorial dispute. What they will not show is that when you give a group of people some resources, how well they excel. For every black bad story, there's 10 black good stories. We don't control the media outlet in which these stories are promoted. We don't give it to our children the history of which we come from. And that's why our community is able to be marginalized like that in the media and references to Chirac. You all hear about Chicago being Chirac, a war zone. Well, in every other war zone in the world, places of conflict receive resources of some type of international humanitarian aid. If these communities are at war, why have they received no humanitarian aid from the local government, the state government, the federal government, and the United Nations? If there's a problem with children dying in Chicago, what type of preventive measures are you taking? Since the whole world is talking about it, you know, put it in the media for so long that how violent Chicago is. Where are the resources for Yahmin not to become another future staff? What type of investment are you making to ensure that Yahmin does not end up in prison now? And what we say is, if they're really concerned about the young, they will provide the economic resources to ensure that y'all go down the right path. Because we know they don't have a problem with spending $70,000 a year to lock one black person up in this country. They have no problem of spending $70,000 to lock us up. Let's see if they have a problem with allocating $50,000 to keep them free.
And then when you have them abandoning, and they don't want to go to school, but some of them have to, and it's just not working out. And then you see that the people who have their families versus the people who don't have their families, the people who have their families together have some type of income from it. And even if they don't, they're still, the love is still there, and you do realize that everything seems to, like, no matter how hard things get, they have each other, and you realize that. But when you have the family who is struggling, and the father isn't there seems to be like a hole in the family members who are there. And no matter how much support they get from everyone, there's still that missing person that plays a key role. But nowadays, it's like I said, an extra parent who's the father, because the woman, the child is adapted to not having them there.
That's right. So one of the things we do is try to focus on mentoring, right? We black folks come from a place where they say it takes a village to raise a child. And so whether it's my children's mother, whether it's my sister or my niece or my daughter, I'm obligated to the women and children, regardless of my relationship to them, but we all have a relationship to the earth, to make sure that they have shelter. I'm obligated to teach young men, you know, young boys how to be men, and young men how to stay men. You know, and embed something in them. We all God's children and Creator's children. And so we all got to act as such, you know. So when you have young men out here without a father, it's other men around these young men in their life whose job is to show them what it is to be a man, and to mentor them, and to invest time in them, and to spend time with them, and to give them the same knowledge that they would want somebody to give their child if they have a child that they're not around. So it's like, it's more of a give to get thing that we must put back out in our culture and our community, because we know what society has done to break up our family, and now we must find ways to keep our families together and keep the young men and women in these families together and strong, because we don't want no youth of our future walking around with a hole in their heart or empty. We want them to have a world to aspire for as it's their world.
And what you do realize nowadays is that if the father is there and they're working in a poor or the lower class situation, you realize that the father is barely there because they have so much work to attend to. And it's just hard to, it still feels like there's a hole.
It is. It is. Even for the fathers who are in the household, because of the economic crisis, they're forced to work so much. And that's why we ask the question in America, are you counting the hours in a day? It's only 24 hours in a day. Because of the economy, some fathers and mothers have to work two jobs, both of them. So you can have a child with a two-parent household, right? But because of the economy and the lifestyle the parent wants to have for their child and themselves, each of them find themselves working almost 12 hours a day, minimum. So you say it's only 24 hours in a day. You sleep, most people, 6 to 8. So for 6 to 8 hours, you're not going to see your parent. That only leaves 16 hours in a day. If they go on for 12 hours working, you'd be lucky to see them for 2 hours a day, because it's going to take an hour to get ready for work, take an hour to get back in for work. So we ask the mathematical question, when you say that parents are not doing a good job with their children, well, no, how can they raise their children when they have to work to keep their children housed, educated, fed, and with proper health care? It's only 24 hours in a day. So then you say, who's raising the children? Well, let's talk about your media. What are you marketing on television? Sex, violence, and drugs. Well, it ain't the parents teaching them that. It's the conditions of society in which you market these products for. And what resources do you have? We've lost our touch with humanity and our responsibility for our future. And that's why every nation in this world is outpacing us educationally. What is it that we're asking of parents? You say there's not enough fathers in the household. Well, look at the fathers who are in the household. They're never there with their child because they got to work so god doggone hard, just to make ends meet. And they missing all of this time. But then you say these children come from an abusive household. Well, if I worked all these hours a day and was stressed out, my child messing up in school, I can't do both. It creates tension and it's ripping apart the core of families in America right now because we lost our touch and our aspiration for human rights in this country. Because when we start to look at things through a human rights lens, be it economic, social, and cultural, we'll start to find out what type of nation we are. Because we're only a nation made up of people. And the conditions of our people will speak to the world in volume what type of nation we are. And right now we're not a good nation. Not one that has prepared its future to be successful. Not one that has showed or became a model for human rights. Not one that has been a model for what humanity should look like. Not even our working class or our per class can say that we're doing a better job.
And what I've seen and when I learned in school is we're studying the ancient Sumerian society. I noticed that the society that we have today is a lot like the ancient societies, except for of a more mental aspect. And you see that if you looked in the city-states of the Sumerians, they had the poor on the outside. So if there were an attack on them, the poor would be the first to go out. And then they put the middle class right behind the poor, and then the higher class in the middle, where they'd be safe. And you notice that there was a vulnerability due to social hierarchy.
That's right.
And it's the same way today in a different way. Because you see that you cut off their access to resources, and there's nothing that they can do about it except for be vulnerable. And no one knows their rights, so they either end up sitting there doing nothing except for just laying there, and then you have people who end up in prison spending the rest of their life in the administrative system. And that's what I've noticed. It might not be true.
No, it is. Actually, you hit it dead on. It's one of the biggest things we have to challenge. One of the biggest challenges we have, one of the biggest things we have to do to challenge the status quo norm is erase our mentality of what we can achieve, what we cannot achieve. We don't believe in can. We only can from this point forward. Because if we don't begin to challenge these structures, they continue to rule the way they have, and the people continue for generations to come to end up in the same barbaric state they're in now. And in the state of have-not versus the have. And it makes no sense that you have a working class and a pro class that can't get together to become have versus the have-nots.
So let's get to the next question. I know we don't want to waste anyone's time now. Is this only a problem in Chicago?
Sad to say, this is a global problem. It's a party for the rich folks, though. It's a global problem. The same thing happened in Chicago. It's happening in our motherland, South, in Africa, Cape Town, South Africa, where our organization started. They're faced with the same problem. People living in shacks, pushed to the outside, while the city thrives. The working class folks in the suburban area, the rich folks in the city. It's like this in L.A., New Orleans, across the country, across the world. You'll see the same system, the same people suffering in the same system. And you'll see the same sufferings, housing, food, education, healthcare, in every place where you have a problem with access to land or access to opportunity.
right to housing kick off in Cape Town, you said, or?
Cape Town, South Africa was one of the first radical groups to begin the process of enforcing that human right to housing. As I said, I've been doing housing for 15 years. I've only been enforcing human rights the last 5. It's been an honor to meet these folks. They were the first ones to kick off. We're going to build some shacks. They kicked them off the land. They went and found their own land. They stole electricity. They built them some shacks, and they housed their women and children. And they defended it with arms, you know. And so it was one of the first groups that really helped us go to the next level as activists in America and activists in the world. We call ourselves human rights activists. You know, they showed us how to become human rights enforcers. So big shout out to Cape Town, South Africa, and LA and Tahiti.
So you said that there were a lot of radicals in Cape Town and the anti-eviction campaign. So can you name a few? So, because we've talked a lot of the problems, we need to get into the solution.
Oh, definitely off the back, I would say Dr. Toussaint Lozier, Shirley Henderson, Martha Biggs, even a young lady, Carol Theodoris, when I first, Denise Forrest from Public Housing, Pat Hill, Miss Harris. There's so many people fighting, folks across the country, you know, Kathy Lennon, you know, she actually won her house outright. You know, Stephanie, there's folks across the country who just really, and in the organization just really doing a lot of stuff. You know, Henry Warfield, you know, there's so many people doing so many things that I can't name them all. But in the campaign, you know, you have a lot of folks, Megan Cow, Matt Lennox, you have a variety of folks providing some type of assistance to people, whether it's taking over housing, fixing up housing, saving housing, fighting with them in court, protesting banks. You have a lot of people doing a lot of things, but all under the name of human rights enforcement.
So what can people do? Because a lot of people want to do something, but they don't know their boundaries.
They can hold accountable their elected officials. They can organize and mobilize in their own neighborhoods and communities. It don't take a lot of people to change the world, just a few people, 3 committed people to change the world. They can stay in tune with what makes sense and what don't make sense. You know, we see a lot of stuff on television that don't make sense, but we don't challenge it. We hear about how the banks are ripping off people, but we don't challenge it. In fact, we perpetuate the problem and add to the problem by still giving these same banks our money. So there's a lot of things people can do. You can start by pulling your money out of banks and put them in credit unions. If the bank is taking your home, is the bank responsible for going to your school? If the bank is responsible for all of these things, why are you still banking with a bank? So we can begin deconstruct our mentality and change the way we think and act, and that's one of the biggest help. And get involved. Everybody should get involved and doing some type of organizing work.
A lot of people that I see nowadays, they get started when they're saying, like, let's make a movement. They're like, do you know how much work that would take? And we don't even know our boundaries. Well, let's research our boundaries.
That's right.
And it's always the small groups of people who make the change. You don't think that slavery ended by just everyone said, you know what, this is wrong, let's just shut it down. It was the small groups of people who made the mass movement against.
That's right. It's to the small group of people. And I think one of the greatest gifts they can do, and the Creator bless your heart for, is what you're doing. Parents beginning to get their children involved in this. Because our country's greatest fear is a conscious youth, especially a youth that will hold their nation accountable to the same standard it says that it militarily enforces across the world for other sovereign nations, and that is human rights, to ensure that people have a right to democracy, housing, healthcare, and all of these things. I think when our youth know that they should hold our government accountable for these things, for wanting to have human rights in America, I think that's the greatest fear that this country will ever have. And you're the beginning of it. I'm blessed as an elder to see a young man like you wanting to do your part, to do something about what's going on in this world. And I think the greatest gift that anybody can do to this world is wake their children up, because they don't make the same mistakes we do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this ran on pretty long, so we should just get wrap this up real quick. We're BenYahmin on the scene with J.R. Fleming, and see you next time.
child.